I hope you guys are going to forgive me for having, I think the last time I had the devotional, I had an agricultural theme, and this time I also have an agricultural theme. So this time it's less random, or I won't say it was random last time, but you're going to get credit for the Isaiah class if you're here for the devotional, because this is part of it. I want to look at Isaiah chapter 5, if you'd like to turn there with me. Isaiah chapter 5. And speaking of the agricultural theme, have you ever noticed it's very easy to grow weeds? Weeds are very easy to grow. You almost don't have to do anything to grow weeds. And you have to do a lot to grow something that's not a weed, right? The Bible is full of teaching through man's understanding of agricultural things and man's knowledge of the way things grow, how you grow things, what you have to do to grow things. And that is because agriculture is a universal, critical thing in any society. You've got to grow things in any community in order to survive. And so all man throughout history has known how to grow things, what it takes to grow things. And anyone who has tried to grow things knows that weeds are easy to grow, whereas productive plants require preparation, they require maintenance. So you've got to work, first of all, to make conditions favorable for those plants. The plants must be protected from elements that harm them. And constant attention is usually required to make sure those plants get what they need. And for wild plants to grow, like I said, you don't have to do a thing. Something's going to grow if you don't do anything there. I would love to have a yard full of nothing but bluegrass. That would be great. Unfortunately, our yard, has clovers, patches of clovers, and other kinds of weeds, dandelions, wildflowers, or dayflowers rather. Those are everywhere. I would love if those just disappeared and there was just bluegrass, but I have to do something about that. I have to work to do that. It takes work, it takes intention to grow good domesticated blackberries, for instance. I have a lot of blackberries in our property, right? And they're not necessarily good if you were to try to eat one. They're kind of bitter. They're tiny in comparison to domestic blackberries, and there's lots of thorns. You hurt yourself when you try to pick them. So I've got plenty of those, and I don't have to try to grow those, but I do have to try to grow domestic ones. Well, Isaiah here in chapter 5, at the beginning of it, uses this picture of a vine keeper, a vineyard keeper, to illustrate God's care for the people of Judah and their lack of knowledge or care for him. I want to read, well, first of all, remember, we went over in Isaiah chapter 1 and verse 2, how God said, I have nourished thee, I have brought up children, and they've rebelled against me, he says, Isaiah 1 and 2. Isaiah 1:3, the ox knows its owner, the donkey, its master's crib, but Israel doth not know, my people do not understand. So God's nourished them, God's brought them up, God's raised them, God has provided for them, and yet they don't know who he is. So let's read Isaiah 5, verses 1 and following. Isaiah says, Now will I sing to my well-beloved a song of my beloved touching his vineyard. My well-beloved have a vineyard in a very fruitful hill, and he fenced it and gathered out the stones thereof and planted it with the choicest vine, and built a tower in the midst of it, and also a winepress therein, and he looked that it should bring forth grapes, and it brought forth wild grapes. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge, I pray you, betwixt me and my vineyard. What could have been done more to my vineyard that I have not done in it? Wherefore, when I looked that it should bring forth grapes, brought it forth wild grapes. And now go to, I will tell you what I will do do to my vineyard. I will take away the hedge thereof, and it shall be eaten up, and break down the wall thereof, and it shall be trodden down. And I will lay it waste, it shall not be pruned nor digged, but there shall come up briars and thorns. I will also command the clouds that they rain no rain upon it. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts, Judah, his pleasant plant, and he looked for judgment, but behold oppression, for righteousness, but behold a cry. Woe to them that join house to house, that lay field to field, till there be no place, that they may be placed alone in the midst of the earth. Now, we'll get into the woes later in class, hopefully, either this Wednesday or next Wednesday, tonight or next Wednesday. But here Isaiah is using this image of a vineyard keeper to illustrate God's love and care for the people of Judah and the results. So let's notice here the following about this song or this parable. First of all, the loving care of the vine keeper. Second of all, the disappointment of the vine keeper. And then third of all, the judgment on the vineyard. So the loving care of the vine dresser. He says, my well-beloved are the vineyard in a very fruitful hill. We see the respect and the love that the prophet has for God in calling him my well-beloved here. But we see here the loving care of the vine keeper. He fenced it. He gathered out the stones thereof, planted it with the choicest vine, built a tower in the midst of it, and also made a winepress there. And in this, you see provision. He says it's a fruitful hill. This is a fertile place to plant this vineyard, to provide for it. There's preparation. He removed the stones from the soil. And then finally, there's protection in this. He protected them. And he did all this with Judah. He did all this with Israel and Judah, in fact. We know their history, how that he brought them out of Egypt. They were once captive there in Egypt, and he brought them out of it, provided for them throughout the wilderness, guided them through the wilderness, provided them everything they needed. And then all those military victories they enjoyed weren't through their own might. Those things were given by God, those victories. And so they entered into that land of Canaan, the land of milk and honey, where they dwelled in houses they did not build. They reaped where they did not sow. God provided all that, and yet we see their gratitude, or their ingratitude, rather, in their actions. He chose a very fruitful hill, he says there. He fenced it, he put up a tower. They were protected people. Israel wouldn't have survived without God's help. So he protected them. So there is no question God was gracious to them. And you know what? God has been and is good to us, isn't he? From a spiritual standpoint, he gave us his Son. He gave us reconciliation, that we might be rejoined, made friends again with the Father. And he's given us his word that we can know what we ought to do in order to gain that reconciliation, to benefit from his love. But from a practical, physical standpoint, you know, we have a lot that's been provided for us. We have a very safe situation here. We can worship we can worship the Father in safety without worrying about our lives. There are some places in the world today where they don't have that. There are times in history where Christians could not meet without fearing for their lives. And yet we don't have that. We're blessed not to have that. We live in relatively prosperous times. We have roofs over our heads, clothes on our backs. We generally don't have to worry about the food, where our next meal is going to come from. We're relatively prosperous. We could complain about the economy today, but relatively, throughout mankind's history, we're living in prosperous times. We have a tremendous opportunity to give toward the church. Grocery stores Washing machines, as I know Hannah brought that up recently. Vehicles, these things give us time, don't they? Things that used to take... We don't have to worry about feeding the chickens every morning, do we? Or going out and milking the cow. We've got grocery stores, right? That saves us a lot of time. What are we using that time for? So we've got enough time to study. We've got enough time to be present whenever our brethren meet. We've got enough time to fill with service to God, more time than a lot of mankind has had throughout history. Technology has made communication easier, more easy than any time in man's history. We can dial a phone and we can have somebody on the other side of the world on the other line, and the internet has made that even easier since the invention of the telephone. So it's never been easier for us to share the gospel from a technological standpoint. And we are also blessed as a congregation. We have elders. Actually, a lot of congregations don't have that. They don't have a strong eldership, and that is a blessing. We have time set aside by our eldership for Bible study, and we have plenty of fellowship opportunities that our brethren are organizing. From a practical and physical standpoint, we are blessed. God has provided for us in many ways. And what else could God give us? What else could God give us? If we are not faithful to Him, what else could He give us to make us faithful? So, brings us to, there's that same question that Isaiah asked. What could have been done more to my vineyard that I have not done in it? What could God have done more to warrant our faithfulness to Him? Brings us to the disappointment of the vine dresser. He looked that it should bring forth grapes, and it brought forth wild grapes. And I found this interesting because he planted a good vine, right? And yet he got wild grapes. I looked into this, and there few sources. Planting a domesticated grapevine that ends up yielding wild grapes can happen under a few circumstances. First, you can have rootstock issues. Many domesticated grapevines are grafted onto rootstocks of wild grape species to improve disease resistance and hardiness. If the grafted part, the scion, dies or is damaged, the rootstock can take over and produce wild grapes. That's one way you can plant a vine and you can graft a good vine into an existing vine. In fact, there's evidence that suggests that grapevines were traded along the Fertile Crescent, the Valley of the Jordan, which is the area we're talking about with Isaiah, and Egypt as many as 5,000 years ago. So these often would be grafted onto the vines of existing plants in the region to have a vine that yielded larger, juicier fruit with more sugar content that was valued. Then there's cross-pollination. If there are wild grapevines nearby, cross-pollination can occur. This might result in seeds that produce wild grape characteristics. The influence of other grapevines coming in kind of reminds me of Judah and Assyria and all these eastern countries and their influence on Judah and Israel in taking up their gods. It's some cross-pollination happening there, some external influence. And so Judah would find that they were producing wild grapes, that much to the disappointment of the vine dresser here. So what about you and me this evening? Can we not also yield wild grapes? We have the freedom and safety to serve God, spread His word to others, but what if we're not doing that? That's wild grapes. If we choose to give our time, our money, our focus on things that are that are below His kingdom, if we put those things above His kingdom, that's wild grapes. There are so many ways. All those blessings I listed before, and you can probably think of a lot more. God has done everything possible to warrant our faithfulness, and yet sometimes we don't do that, do we? wild grapes. So that brings us to the judgment of the vineyard. Isaiah says, now go to, I will tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will take away the hedge thereof, and it shall be eaten up, and break down the wall thereof, and it shall be trodden down. And I will lay it waste. It shall not be pruned nor digged, but there shall come up briars and thorns. I will also command the clouds that they rain no more upon it. And so this evening, and of course this has a direct application to Judah and the prophecy against Judah, but also we can take a lesson from that as well. Because just like Judah was provided all these things, everything they needed to be fruitful for God, we too have been provided everything we need to be fruitful to God. If you have any need this evening, maybe you are bringing forth wild grapes, you can change that this evening. You can repent of those things that are those external influences. Repent of the actions you are taking that yield those things. If you have found that your faith is lacking or your faithfulness is lacking, we're here for you this evening. If you have any need, come forward as we stand and as we sing.